There is an enzyme in your liver right now that is roughly 10 million years older than your species. It exists for one purpose: to break down alcohol. It was already there, fully formed, before Homo sapiens, before Homo erectus, before anything you'd recognize as a human being walked upright across a plain. Which raises a strange question. If nobody was drinking 10 million years ago, what was it for? The answer leads somewhere much bigger. By the end of this, I'm going to make the case that agriculture, the invention that gave us cities and writing and everything after it, may have happened because our ancestors wanted a reliable supply of beer. That's a real argument made by real archaeologists, and the evidence sits in a 13,000-year-old cave in Israel. But we start with the monkeys. Most animals can't handle ethanol. They have no efficient way to process it, so a real dose lands somewhere between deeply unpleasant and fatal. Primates are the exception. We carry a version of an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase 4 that breaks ethanol down about 40 times faster than the version our earlier ancestors had. And the point that upgrade appears in the family tree is roughly the point our ancestors came down out of the trees. A biologist at Berkeley named Robert Dudley spent decades working out why, and the theory he landed on has the best name in science: the drunken monkey hypothesis. Our ancestors ate fruit, enormous quantities of it, for millions of years, and fruit at the exact moment of perfect ripeness begins to ferment. Wild yeast lands on the skin, eats the sugar, produces alcohol, which means the smell of alcohol was never a warning. It was an advertisement. It said maximum sugar, maximum calories right now before somebody else gets there. So the ones who smelled fermentation and felt nothing wandered off and ate something worse. The ones who felt pulled toward it ate better, lived longer, had more children. Run that for a few million years, and you don't get an animal that tolerates alcohol. You get an animal that likes it. And this has been tested. In Panama, researchers measured the fruit wild spider monkeys actually chose. It came in between 1 and 2% alcohol. Then they tested the monkey's urine and found the byproducts of ethanol metabolism, meaning the animals weren't just eating it, they were processing it. A study on chimpanzees estimated that a normal day of normal fruit delivers the ethanol equivalent of 1 to 2 human drinks. Not as a choice, just as lunch. Not every biologist buys the full theory. Either way, the conclusion holds. Long before any human decided to make a drink, the machinery and the appetite were already installed. Which brings us to the leap. Stumbling onto fermented fruit is one thing. Deliberately making it is something else. It requires you to notice what happened to that grain last time it got wet, remember it, connect a cause to an effect days apart, and then reproduce it on purpose. That isn't foraging. That's an experiment. The earliest strong evidence of someone doing it sits in Rockefet Cave, near Haifa. It was a burial site used by the Natufians, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers of the eastern Mediterranean, and they were nothing like the cartoon version of cave people. They buried their dead on beds of flowers. They kept dogs. Inside that cave, cut into the bedrock, archaeologists found stone mortars. A team led by the Stanford archaeologist Li Liu analyzed the residue still trapped inside them, and what came back described a 3-stage process. Sprout the grain in water, mash it and heat it. Leave it to ferment with whatever yeast is in the air. That's brewing. Wheat and barley beer, made in a tomb 13,000 years ago. Here's the part that should stop you. The Natufians were not farmers. Farming didn't exist yet anywhere on Earth. They were gathering wild grain by hand, which is brutal work, and instead of eating all of it, they were spending some of it on beer for their dead. That's the crack archaeologists have driven a wedge into. The best known is Brian Hayden, and the idea is called beer before bread. Ask the obvious question. Why would anyone give up foraging? Foraging works. You follow the food, you eat a varied diet, you work fewer hours. Farming means staying put, breaking ground, waiting months, gambling everything on one crop. It's a worse deal on nearly every measure. So, what makes it worth doing? One answer is bread. You need calories and grain stores. That's the mainstream position. And plenty of archaeologists think brewing came second, a spin off of food processing people already did. The other answer is that grain gave you something bread couldn't, a drink that loosened people, that turned a gathering into a feast, that could be poured for the gods and for the dead, and that let a man with a surplus put an entire village in his debt. Beer as social technology. And the reason the argument is still alive is Rockfet, because it shows the desire to brew was there before the fields were. After that, the record fills in from everywhere at once. 9,000 years ago in Jiahu in central China, pottery jars held a fermented mix of rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit, an ancient cocktail. 8,000 years ago in what is now Georgia, clay vessels the size of a person, buried up to the neck in the earth, carried the chemical signature of grape wine. Georgians still make it that way, and will tell you they invented wine. And there's no point arguing. None of these cultures were in contact. They each worked it out alone, in roughly the same window. Fermentation isn't a lucky accident that spread. It's something humans discover every time you give them grain, sugar, and patience. Then, Mesopotamia turned it into an institution. Sumerian workers were paid in beer. Not tipped, paid, with clay tablets recording it as precisely as a modern payroll. Around 4 pints a day for an ordinary laborer. They had a goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, the lady who fills the mouth, and the hymn written for her around 1800 BCE has enough detail that in 1989, an American brewer rebuilt the recipe from it and served it in clay jugs, drunk through long straws the way the Sumerians did. And the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal codes on earth, sets rules for the price and quality of beer. Water it down in Babylon and they threw you in the river. Humanity's first great law code contains consumer protection for alcohol. We've always known what matters, but notice what keeps happening. The Natufians brewed in a burial cave. The Egyptians labeled wine jars with the vineyard and the vintner and sealed them into tombs and credited beer to Osiris, god of the dead and of resurrection. Chinese burial sites hold vessels of beer made for the deceased. Across cultures that never met, the earliest alcohol we can find is almost always at a funeral, which suggests the invention was never really the drink. Alcohol makes you slower, more honest, less guarded, and drinking it in front of other people is a small, deliberate act of surrender. You don't get drunk beside someone you expect to attack you. So a shared cup is a statement. I'm lowering my defenses and trusting you not to use it. That's the technology, not the buzz, the trust. And a species that can manufacture trust at scale can build a village, then a city, then everything else. So next time somebody hands you a drink, understand what you're holding. A ritual object, at minimum 13,000 years old, invented for the dead. And behind it, 10 million years of small primates in the canopy catching the scent of something sweet and slightly wrong and going toward it every single time. We didn't stumble into this. We grew toward it, the way a plant grows toward light. If you want the other half of the story, the point where humans stopped waiting on yeast and learned to concentrate alcohol into something strong enough to burn, that's distillation. And it has a far darker history. That's the next video.